Hey guys, Will here. So we're continuing our testing with the RTX 4090 today with a look at a selection of some high-end VR headsets. Now, I thought long and hard about the best way to present this video. I thought about doing a bunch of benchmarks, taking you through a bunch of charts, and I thought what you guys really want to know here is what is the actual improvement to the user experience with these headsets. Obviously, we've already determined that there's going to be a decent bump in performance with the RTX 4090 over a 30 series graphics card. What we want to find out is whether that extra bump in frames is actually going to translate to a better user experience. So what we have here is a Pimax 8KX, a 5K Super, a Varjo Aero, and a HP Reverb G2. Now, at the time that we did our reviews of all of these headsets, we were using a RTX 3090, and one of the comments that I had on all four of them was that we weren't really able to extract the maximum amount of performance that these headsets are able to offer because of the graphics bottlenecks that we were running into. So we're having to do things like introduce foveated rendering to reduce the resolution in the outer extremities of our peripheral vision, for example. We're having to reduce the super sampling, all the kinds of things that you have to do with all four of these headsets to get the right balance of performance or maximize the overall user experience relative to what the hardware is actually capable of. So by the end of today's video, you should have a good understanding of what kind of real world performance increase, what kind of user experience boost you're going to see if you own any sort of high-end headset like these ones and you're looking at getting a 4090. So let's dive in. So we spent the last 3 days now testing pretty much every single scenario possible across the headsets that we have here, as well as the sim titles that we tested. So we tested in ACC, AC, iRacing, Automobilista 2, Dirt Rally 2, F1 22, which now has VR, as you guys know, and Microsoft Flight Simulator 2020 as well. Now, I've got 3 pages of notes here that I'm going to kind of go through as we do this. But the long and the short of it was basically, compared to the 3090, we were seeing about a 60 to 80% performance uplift here. Now, obviously, not everybody's going to be upgrading from a 3090. So what I've tried to do here is focus the results more on the experience that you're going to get with each of these headsets with the 4090 rather than comparing it to other older graphics cards. You guys know what you have and you can compare the numbers that you're seeing here and the results that you see here to what your experience is with the gear that you guys have at home. So for the purpose of comparison, I tuned all the titles that we tested to achieve as close as I could to a stable frame rate of about 80 frames per second. Now, I chose that number because for me personally, that's about the point with VR where I feel comfortable. Anything below that and I start to get a little bit of motion sickness, I start to not enjoy the experience so much. Anything over that, I don't really notice a significant difference either. Now, one of the other really important factors with VR, of course, is the fluctuation in frame rate. So even if you're achieving an average frame rate of say 80 frames per second, if it's going up to 160 and dropping down to 30 all the time, that is going to induce all sorts of motion sickness, all sorts of issues, and really degrade the overall experience too. So I was trying to fine tune things to have as stable at 80 as I possibly could, minimal fluctuation going on. Now, you could, of course, further tune and optimize for each headset depending on your preference. So maybe you find it uncomfortable below 90 frames per second, 100 frames per second. With the 4090, those frame rates are absolutely achievable. It's just a case of how much you're having to sacrifice in terms of the visual quality or the resolution scaling, for example, or the foveated rendering if you have that available on your headset to achieve those frame rates, but definitely achievable with the 4090. So let's start off with the results in Assetto Corsa Competizione. As expected, ACC was the most difficult title to tune and unfortunately did still require some sacrifices in terms of the visual fidelity to achieve a stable frame rate above about 70 frames per second without foveated rendering or fixed foveated rendering, depending again on the headset. Now, the Varjo Aero headset does have foveated rendering, which actually moves with relation to your pupils because it has pupil tracking. The Pimax headsets have fixed foveated rendering, which means that it stays fixed on a central position and it can reduce the resolution scaling outside that central area. Now, interestingly, we found that the performance turning on FFR on the Pimax headsets was actually a little bit lower and a little bit less stable than having it turned off altogether. The frame rates are actually really good on both headsets with FFR turned off. Now, I don't really understand the reason for that. If you guys know, let us know in the comments down below. I'm not claiming to be an expert here. I'm just sharing my experience with you guys. But that was one thing that did definitely trip me up and confuse me because I was expecting, obviously, with FFR turned on, the frame rates would be a lot higher, and it just wasn't the case. But it is what it is. We can only share the results that we have here. So running the VR Epic Epic preset or the maximum setting on the HP Reverb G2, the Varjo Aero and the Pimax 5K Super. The frame rates were on average around about 50 frames per second, and that was with a full field of cars. There were occasional dips below 30 frames per second, and that was with foveated rendering turned off. With that turned on, it was closer to the sort of 60 or 70 frames per second, obviously depending on how aggressive you go with that foveated rendering. And foveated rendering actually does work really well because you don't notice the impact on the resolution outside in your peripheral vision so much. But with some tuning of resolution, scaling, graphics settings and foveated rendering where available, I was able to achieve a balance of settings in the high to epic range without dropping resolution scaling below about 80%. And this resulted in a much better experience than I was ever able to achieve with my 3090 previously. So whereas with the 3090, I'd have to run my settings at pretty much as low as they would go to achieve 70 to 80 frames per second. With the 4090, I was able to achieve that pretty easily with minimal overall visual impact. With the Reverb G2, it did require a little bit more tweaking to achieve that, but it was absolutely 100% achievable and definitely a massive uplift in the overall, I guess, immersion of the game, simply because you're just getting such better visual quality and fidelity overall whilst maintaining a higher frame rate, which makes the game playable but still look good. So absolutely a very big and significant step forward for the 4090 with ACC in VR. So let's move on to Assetto Corsa now. So performance here was very impressive as well. This is of course an 8-year-old game now, so I threw everything I possibly could at it with a full suite of custom shader patch mods, including rain, puddles, lightning, windscreen, even flame effects we put in there. And we were still able to achieve frame rates which matched the native refresh rates of the panels inside these displays. I threw even more at it. So I put a full field of traffic with a big open scale world map in AC as well. So I really did throw absolutely everything I could at it to try and make it fail. And even still, it was very rare to get a dip below about 90 frames per second. So I'd say in the case of AC, the 4090 is enough to take full advantage of any of these headsets that we see here. And that did actually quite surprise me. So we'll move on to iRacing now. Now, iRacing is, of course, a 14-year-old game now, so it is running an older game engine, although they have made quite a few significant jumps in the visual quality since the game was originally released, of course. But the point here is that VR performance in iRacing was already pretty good with my 3090 previously. Performance here really does depend on the track that you're driving on as well. With anti-aliasing and anisotropic filtering turned down to about 2 times, I was able to crank most everything else up to maximum and maintain a stable frame rate over about 70 frames per second on all the headsets that we tested, in many cases over 90 frames per second. However, on tracks like Tsukuba, for example, where there's a lot of intricate detail very close to the edge of the track, frame rates were impacted significantly and they did start to fluctuate quite a lot more. So I ended up having to make a few sacrifices in terms of resolution scaling and setting a couple of settings to medium rather than high. And when I did that, I was able to achieve stable frame rates of about 90 frames per second and the experience was absolutely fine. And again, a step up in visual fidelity over what we were able to achieve with the 3090. But having said that, of course, the performance was already pretty darn good with the 3090 in iRacing. So I'd say if you're only playing iRacing, you're not interested in the other titles that we tested, then there's definitely less value here with the 4090 as an upgrade over a 3090, for example, than what you're seeing in most of the other games that we tested here. And we expected that result, but yeah, we definitely did see an uplift in performance here to 70 to 100 frames per second. Absolutely no problem at all with the 3090, with the graphics turned up pretty much to the point where you can't tell the difference between the setting that we landed on and the absolute maximum setting anyway. So again, very impressive performance. So moving on to Automobilista 2 now. This title has some of the best VR implementation that we've seen in sim racing and was already stunningly immersive with the 3090. 4090 takes things a step further and did allow me to maintain a stable frame rate regardless of the conditions, and I did throw everything at this title as well, as you guys can see on the screen now, with a very, very wet scenario at Suzuka. So regardless of the number of cars on track as well, I was always able to maintain a pretty stable frame rate at least 70 frames per second at high to maximum settings. Now, as was the case with iRacing, the experience here was already pretty good with the 3090. So again, I wouldn't say the 4090 revolutionizes Automobilista 2, but again, if you're an FPS junkie, you'll definitely appreciate the significant performance boost here. So on to Dirt Rally 2 and F122 now. Dirt Rally 2 and F122 were where I saw the biggest boost in performance, believe it or not, over the 3090, which I was using previously. So whereas previously I had to run resolution at around 50% scaling or low detail settings to achieve playable frame rates, and when I say playable, I mean over about maybe 50, 60 frames per second. Now I was able to run high to ultra settings in most conditions with only occasional dips below about 70 frames per second. And in many cases, the frame rate was actually pretty darn stable at 90 frames per second, just with the occasional dip down to around the 70 mark, but I never saw it go below about 70. So F122 is unfortunately still quite glitchy when it comes to VR, which just appears to be down to the game's integration. And I do see plenty of complaints about the game crashing, although we didn't have that experience personally with the 4090. When I ran my 3090, I was having all sorts of issues with just the frame rate being, you know, below 10 frames per second. I never was really able to get it working properly. So when I plugged in the 4090 and saw frame rates of 70 to 90 frames per second without changing anything else, I was pretty blown away by that. And I don't know whether there was some issue with an older driver, because it has been a few months since I tried it. So it may not be just purely down to the graphics card upgrade, but definitely good performance there when it works properly. As I said, we didn't have any issues with the game crashing, but I have seen a lot of other people having issues with F122. So just be aware of that. If you are looking at investing a lot of coin in a VR headset and a 4090 to play that game, definitely wouldn't be surprised if you do run into some issues with stability, at least at this point in time when we're making the video. Now, Dirt Rally 2 was genuinely a transformative experience. As was the case with ACC, previously had to run at low to maybe a couple of medium settings on the 3090, but with the 4090 we're able to run high to ultra on pretty much everything, and it really does transform the game. Looks absolutely amazing and able to hold stable frame rates at more than enough to provide a smooth experience. So that is it for the sim racing titles. Now a quick chat about Microsoft Flight Simulator as well, and this was another impressive result considering the sheer scale of this game and everything that it's having to draw. So with the 3090 it struggled to get frame rates over about 30 frames per second without turning the graphics down to the point where the game just looked absolutely garbage. With the 4090 I was able to achieve frame rates in the 40 to 50 frames per second range. Now that might sound very low, but for me at least in flight simming, because you're not having to react to things so quickly like you do with driving simulation, frame rate isn't quite so critical. As long as it's not sort of chopping around and, you know, giving you stutters, then it's pretty playable at lower frame rates. Now you might not agree with me on that, and let us know in the comments if you don't agree. What kind of frame rate do you find you need in VR and flight sim for the game to be smooth and playable for you? But yeah, for me, being able to play at 40 to 50 frames per second at high to ultra high settings, again, transformed the game for me. I really enjoyed the experience on all these headsets playing Microsoft Flight Simulator with the 4090. Now, of course, if you do want more than 40 to 50 frames per second, you can make some sacrifices to resolution scaling and visual quality, but that is where I landed. So look, in conclusion, there were a few gems among the mix, in particular Dirt Rally 2 and Assetto Corsa Competizione, where the performance boosts over what was previously possible with the 3090 is significant enough, I think, to justify the upgrade, provided that you're not stretching yourself financially to do so. It's always a relative thing there, and I'm certainly not suggesting that you sell a body part to pay for a 4090. That would not be a sensible thing to do. So otherwise, while the performance is very impressive with the 4090, it's still not quite there in terms of being able to take 100% full advantage of what these higher end headsets are able to offer. We were still having to make a few little sacrifices there to quality, and I think the next generation on from here, or maybe even the 4090 Ti when that releases, might just get us that last few percent up to being able to take full advantage of these headsets. So it's a little bit of a strange one here. There's a significant enough upgrade from the older series graphics cards to the 4090 to say, yes, it absolutely does make a significant improvement to the experience. But if you're one of those people that's going, oh, I really want to wait until I can get 100% benefit from my headset that I spent a fortune on, then maybe it might be worth just sticking with what you have for now and waiting for either the 4090 Ti to come out. Maybe DLSS 3, when that's fully integrated, might make the difference as well. But look, for me right now, I am happy that I spent the money on the 4090. Obviously, we have a pretty unique usage case here with the triple 4K displays that we run on our day-to-day driving rigs. So we always do need the best graphics card available to, get the best experience out of that and produce the best quality videos that we can. So personally, I'm happy that I bought one. I'm not suffering any buyer's remorse whatsoever, but obviously your financial position might be different. So just keep in mind the results that you've seen here today when determining whether or not you think that this is going to be a valuable upgrade for you. So I really hope that today's video has helped you out. If you're interested in more information on any of the headsets that you've seen in today's video as well, we do have dedicated review videos for all 4 of these headsets right here on the channel. I'll drop some links to those down in the description below for you. If you do decide you want to buy one of these as well, we do have some affiliate links, which is an awesome way of helping support the channel. So really hope that this has helped you out, guys. Leave a thumbs up. If it has, leave a comment down below as well, letting us know what you guys think. If you already have a 4090, what is your experience like? Are you looking at upgrading? You thinking you're going to skip this generation? Let us know down in the comments below. And if you aren't already, make sure that you've hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out on future content around the 4090. We've got a whole bunch of really fun stuff planned. So stick around, guys. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you again very soon. Bye.